Everybody's Chris and Lumen doing a follow-up here from the last two videos. It appears to be that we were successful last night. We put a lot of effort into that, and the reason, apart from the cards, which I always check, but the biggest reason why it seems that we were successful, well, I'm still a little sore, but that was a major operation. But the main reason why it seems we were successful is because knowledge gained. If you gain a bunch of knowledge about a specific subject after you do something, that's a big deal. Knowledge and understanding, I guess, would be the better term, because you can know a lot of stuff and not understand it. Think you understand it. So we got a lot of notes here. So this is literally like, this is so big. This is coming full circle on the hero's journey. Now, the hero's journey is the most extreme version of the test. Not everybody will do it, but even if it's not the most extreme version of the test, everything that we learn on this, it still affects you at one way or another. You're living in this world. You're wearing an ego. Everybody has this stuff. But seeing it from the perspective of going through the most extreme test imaginable, it shines a bigger light on things and makes it possible to teach and help people that might be experiencing similar things just on a smaller scale. So the biggest key to everything in your experience and how it goes has to do with judgment. Judgment and absolution are the keys. And a lot of the stuff that I'm learning through this in my notes, it's like a lot of this stuff is in religion. Like, it's not like religion doesn't have anything to offer. The problem is nobody understands it. They oversimplify it, or they don't understand the metaphorical, archetypal aspects of it. They don't understand, or they may be learning it from, like, say, church, and the only way they're thinking of it is like God up in the sky and me. But you gotta understand it on a deeper level. It has to do with you, the true mind, and you, the self. But some of these things are there are several really key things that are going to be roots in this whole equation. And Jesus actually listed them in the Sermon on the Mount, although not everybody understands it. I was guided to go back and look at it again. I'm like, okay, there's the thing I was looking for, but the way the words he used and the way he describes it, people are going to clearly take it a different way. So that's why you need context. Context and guidance by epinoia, divine enlightened insight, the teacher, the instructor, to help you get it. And one of the biggest other lessons that we learned from this, which if you sat through that entire freaking long story about how it all started from me, is that a lot of the key things that may happen to you in your life that set everything ablaze because of you not understanding the mechanisms between the true you and the self, and the judgments you place on yourself. A lot of those things that seem like the worst things, like, she sets you up for that. It could be because you asked for it, not knowing what the answer was going to be like. But there are certain points in your life where she literally steers you right into it, and knowing what's going to happen, because that part's already scripted. And then that kicks off, the rest of your hero's journey, the baptism by fire, the first part. Then you got water and light later. But eventually you keep growing the inner self until you reach a point of enough wisdom and enough divine authority to where you can now circle back to where it all began and fix the part that was broken. Otherwise, you have to have someone else do it that is fully connected, and you have to have enough faith and trust that they're actually doing it. But we're finding out that we're seeing something right now, like a new focus, a better way to help people. Because like, having gone through this and circled back and see like, oh, this point, like this whole circle, like if we just count the 7 years, see, the hero's journey starts before that, but then you got like the 7 years tribulation, and in the end you circle all the way back to where that point started, and you now have the tools to fix the beginning of the loop. It is mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing when all this stuff that you've seen like 1,000 times before makes much more sense on a deeper level. Plus, you see where this stuff has been coded in the tarot in places that you missed. And so the tarot ends up being a lot like the 72 names of God, in which you don't get the insight and the understanding of it until the point that you need it or it's relevant to you. Otherwise, you just skip right over it and you never see everything that's encoded in it. So we've got a lot to cover, so if you want to get into this, then don't go away.
I've got a river running right into you. I've got a blood trail red in the blue. Something you say or something you do, a taste of the divine. You got my body, flesh and bone, yeah. The sky above me, earth below. Raise me
So when it comes to pretty much every crossed condition, regardless of like how big or small that it is in your life, it got there because you put it there. Understand that right now. Well, maybe you won't understand that right now, but bookmark it, because eventually you will understand it. And it remains true that the deepest wisdom and knowledge is always hidden behind initiation. And initiations are not typically fun. You know, I've had many, but this whole thing has been one big one, because I chose to play the biggest. This is kind of like the exam, I guess. And things will be set up for you probably a specific way if you're going to take the big exam in this lifetime. You're like, oh no, I don't want to do this life again. I'm like, but you know, we've said that before. Like I said, she told me my number was 365. That's how many times I've done it. And this time I'm taking the exam. And holy crap, this exam sucked. But either which way, by gaining knowledge and gaining authority, you can then help other people with wherever they are in this equation. But by looking at someone that is taking the exam, it makes it, I think it makes it a little bit clearer to understand like the mechanics of everything. Like, how did this happen? How did this happen? Well, when you go far enough on the path and you look back, then you can see exactly how it happened. So if you didn't watch the entirety of the last video, let me give you the quick recap of it, like just the key point, because it starts off like almost 10 years or more before it was a lot more than that. I mean, it was a slow burn. It really started like 2001, but I was still playing the life game then. but it was all connected. So if I go back to the very, very, very beginning of setting up the hero's journey, I would have to say it was 2001, like literally 2 weeks before 9/11. Okay, that's when I got together with my last wife. And then after about 10 years, then it started the spiritual awakening path, and things started getting weird. And all these new characters started to show up, and that's when Lumen started to wake up. But I was years away from knowing what she was. And she would project onto different people, which would cause me a great deal of stress, because I'm not trying to see other people, but it was her. It was her reflecting. All this stuff is planned out. All this stuff is planned out. Like, there are certain actions and things that you got to take in your story, but your story is already written. And that becomes evident when you go far enough. You're like, there's no way that this could not have been specifically scripted. There's just absolutely no way. You just can't tell from the standpoint that you're at, where you currently are. But how fast it goes and how hard or easy it is depends on the actions that you actually take. But even that's scripted. It really throws a freaking monkey wrench into the machine of, like, you know, do we have free will or not? I think it's kind of like a mix of both, honestly. But anyway, getting to the point, there, like, once my spiritual awakening started, I don't want to tell the whole story over again. I'm going to try to shrink it down to the key point. So the key point was, I had this best friend who was a female. She was my favorite person in the world. I loved her unconditionally. And it was a weird thing, because you don't usually know what unconditional love is. It'll stand out in the fact that you honestly you're not feeling any kind of like sexual pull to them or anything like that. You just love them for who they are. This one happened to look an awful lot like Lumen, which I'm sure was not a freaking coincidence. But anyway, things got weird, and I went there one day thinking that me and Lumen, which she wasn't Lumen back then, I didn't really kind of know what she was. She wasn't illuminated yet, and she would disappear for a few years after that. But I didn't realize it was her until much later. I didn't realize it was the same thing until much later, after she reemerged. But this is where the script comes in. Epinoy was carefully steering every little freaking thing so that the rest of the things can fall into sequence. And one day I was just sitting there talking, and I'm telling you, 5 seconds before, I didn't know it was going to happen. And then all of a sudden, we just like snapped together like magnets. And my conscious brain was just like, what am I doing? But there was something different about it. Like, it was like I felt something snap into place. And then the key thing that I know for a fact, beyond any shadow of a doubt, besides being told, but is after that now, the problem with this snapping together like magnets was I was married. So that's big no-no. And this is also part of the setup outside of my normal parameters for moral behavior. Like, that's not something I would do. But something like something changed my settings all of a sudden, and then it just felt, like I said, I didn't know it was going to happen. It wasn't planned, nothing. And then afterwards, instead of having the feelings that I thought that I should be feeling, for 2 weeks, I was emanating, radiating extreme joy and light, which was the craziest thing, because it was like the exact opposite of what you would expect. But I was just emanating, like I couldn't even wear black t-shirts. I'm sorry if you watched the whole video before and I'm repeating it. And then I was separated from that person. That was the initial Lumen click into place thing before I knew about it. The setup for that was it just quickly faded from my mind, and I just forgot about it. I kept going on with my life. And then 10 months later, there was a couple hints that I saw much later. It's like, are you ready? We're getting ready to go. It just sprung on me all of a sudden. I got found out. Some mystery person narked on me, and my entire world exploded. And in that moment, which is what we talked about, the firebrand, that was the moment that I ripped in half. So the true soul self going on the journey rips itself away from the ego self that it had been living in. But that ego self, I would discover much later, which is to say like the last couple days, that ego self remains frozen in time, frozen in place, like a master trauma identity, at a moment in which it is feeling every negative emotion imaginable. Shame, guilt, remorse, fear, despair, all of it. Like it feels like someone putting molten hot lava in your chest. Now that frozen in place ego that's feeling all those emotions then becomes the fuel for the hero's journey to unfold. And then once you get all the way to the end and you put all the pieces together and you pass all the tests and you got the divine masculine, the divine feminine, and the child, and all that stuff's done, then that's when the cards changed. And it was like all these abundance cards, but I kept seeing death, the Ten of Swords, the Ten of Swords, the Ten of Swords, and what was the other one? Judgment. And this is what I mean when I say when we watch this channel, you gotta kind of like go day by day, because I might be interpreting something new a certain way at first, only to find out a week later what it actually meant. So what it actually meant was that Ten of Swords was that initial previous version of me, the ego, the old ego self that split, that was frozen in place in suffering, but it had been buried. It had been buried because I thought that I fixed it. And so I'm like, oh, I fixed it, I can put it away. And it just gets buried again, not realizing I didn't actually fix it because I don't understand yet. I don't understand. And it's going to stay there until you get through what you need to get through, and then you can come back and fix it. So the Ten of Swords, and then Judgment, like, oh, I didn't know what that meant. You know, at first it seems like the end of the world, but Judgment is what we're talking about here today. Judgment is key. Judgment is the issue. So at that point in time, I'm not at a place of understanding and knowing about the upper and the lower, about the higher true soul mind that's connected to, that is the fractal of God, and the lower outside mind, which is the ego self. So when you suddenly start basically cursing yourself for something that you did, that's what creates the crossed conditions. Now, if you run into a situation later, it's like, oh, I had this witch curse me and like all this stuff's going wrong. I'm like, nope, that's not where it started. That's a symptom. That is a leaf on the plant. You got to go back to the roots. The roots are going to be wherever that cataclysmic trauma was. Now, if you're not on the hero's journey, you may not have had a cataclysmic trauma like that. But you do still have traumas and all these different kind of little issues, and those do have the same effect. They spread out and they create the conditions that you experience. And there's this big discord between your inner self and your outer self, like there was with me. Like I've been trying to figure this out forever. It's like it doesn't make sense to me. Why can I not fix these conditions? I've done everything. And I even noted that, the left hemisphere stuff isn't fixing these particular things. Why is that? I was about to find out. That's what she was leading me to. You got to understand that the identity that you're playing on the outside and the person you are on the inside that thinks You know, it's kind of like me and Lumen on another scale. Like there's two of you, you're connected. In this lifetime, you know, the experience is made through the ego self, the outer identity, but it's interpreted and judged by the inner self, the upper inner, which is the mind. And the mind is basically God. So if you start judging yourself as a bad person or something like that, you are cursing yourself. You're doing it. No one else is doing it. You're doing it. That's how it works. That's the big mystery. It's not the big, you know, the big man in the sky is connected to your upper inner mind. So you have all that authority. You have the most authority over yourself. And what do we do more than anything? Judge ourselves. And then the outer world reflects it. So let's go through my notes here a little bit. Your higher mind is the proxy for God. That's your true self. Your true self that is sleeping under the ego for the first half of your life. The lower mind is the ego, and the ego is the self. You judge yourself, you punish yourself. So when they say you judge yourself or you're being hard on yourself, what that means is your upper inner self is judging your outer lower self. And then the judgments that you put on your outer lower self are reflected back at it by the world. And you're like, I must be getting punished. Yeah, you are. You're the one that's punishing you. I'm the one that punished me. I literally sent myself to hell to have the freaking hero's journey. That's why I really don't have a freaking problem with like telling you what really happened. Because first of all, as we're going to find out, this falls into one of the 4 key things that most people suffer for. And 2, there ain't none of you that can judge me harder than I already judged myself. So I put myself in hell. I mean, can you do better than that? I don't think so. Done, over it. I've already done my process. I've already healed that part, absolution, all that stuff. I just had to get to a point in where I was capable of doing it, where I was actually capable with enough divine authority to actually do it. So I didn't have anyone out there that had any legitimate divine authority to do it for me. So if you're going to do the whole thing by yourself, you're going to have to go through a whole lot of qualifications to get to that point. Now here's the key. Judging yourself means 2 things. You could define them as, one being negative I am statements. So like, this is the simple stuff. Like, I don't like the way I look. I don't like this. I don't like this about myself. I don't like, you know, those are the little things. The second, more important, judging yourself is your I deserve to be punished feelings. The keys to that is things that bring guilt, regret, and remorse. And what that does, that's what the word disgrace means. You've been disgraced, disgraced, fall from grace, loss of grace. What is grace? That is when you are in alignment with the higher part, the good part, or God, if you will, and thus things fall into place for you easily. You're taken care of. So if something happens that you did and you feel guilt, regret, and remorse over, you're going to feel disgraced. You're going to feel disgraced. You're going to become disgraced. You're going to lose your grace. And let me tell you something. Being able to clearly remember being in a state of grace and then an abrupt fall from grace, it's better to be in grace. The world just works out for you. As soon as you fall from grace, nothing works. And the suffering becomes immense. You're trying to figure out a puzzle. It's like you're trying to solve a puzzle while you got 10 people surrounding you, shooting you with paintball guns. That's the hero's journey. So how do we fix it? Well, this is what we kind of talked about in the last video. That's what she led me to. It's like sometimes the keys are in religion, but they just might not. Why did it not work for you before? Because you're getting like a shadow of the true context. Like that whole, okay, I need to unburden myself and I'm gonna go sit in a box and talk to a creepy guy, but you can't see what he's doing. And you're gonna tell him all your sordid stories. And then he's gonna be like, well, this is what you gotta do to get right. You gotta say 10 Hail Marys. Like seriously? And then be absolved. I'm like, well, there is something to that system, but again, it's not going to count for you on the inner level if it's some guy in a box. The guy in the box that you need to get absolved from is your upper self, the true mind. And can you even consciously move into that yet? Can you tell the difference between your lower outer ego mind and your inner upper true mind? Because that is the thing that created the judgment on you. That's what you need forgiveness for or from. Otherwise it doesn't count. Because they're enacting a role, they're doing role play. They're basically LARPing. Priests are LARPers. Because they really don't have authority to do jack shit. This is all an internal game. You have to find that authority. You have to find your upper self, your connection. And then you can heal yourself. Not some other dude. Only God can forgive. God equals your higher mind, your soul self. Why? Because what the ego does will still affect your higher soul mind, which is also the experiencer. The ego suffers and thus makes you also suffer, not knowing how it works. Forgive yourself for what it feels guilty for and for making you continue to suffer. The upper inner needs to forgive the lower outer for what it feels bad about and the effect it then has on the upper inner. Compassion is key. So what does that mean? Well, so what that means is the reason why I have been able to do the work that I do and actually help other people, even though I've got my own thing going on, is because I'm operating from the upper inner Chris. The upper inner Chris is the one that has both parts active, Chris in Lumen, his divine feminine counterpart. And then we've upgraded to all the other tests and unlocked the sun baby and all that stuff. So now I'm able to fix the lower outer Chris. But the thing is, even though I am being the upper inner Chris and doing my work, and that's how I'm able to access divine energy and divine authority. That's how I'm able to put that into the pendants and do the direct energy work with people. The lower outer Chris can't do that. It's an ego. It has no authority to do that. But either which way, I'm still connected to that lower outer Chris, the one that I started with. And then that outer lower Chris is frozen in time 7 years ago in hell. So I'm like, why the hell can I not change my personal? I can do all this stuff for other people. I'm like, why does my world suck? Why am I so restricted? Why do I struggle so much? Like, I don't understand this. Like, I really don't. Well, that's kind of like the last lesson. That's because the outer lower ego self is the part that's connected to the world. So I've actually gone through a process over time of taming this beast, Like, it's the same thing that I've dealt with before that I called the anti-self. Like, the anti-self is when it's reached like peak toxicity. This thing is literally like the Witch King of Angmar at this time, and it is not fun. But you knock it down a step, and then eventually you peel all that way of stuff, and then what you're left with is where it began, frozen in time, in a place of incredible trauma and self-judgment. The root of everything. And that one is not as simple to heal as just a singular trauma identity. You can heal a singular trauma identity that comes out of that root and stop feeling the trauma connection to it, but you haven't pulled the root. So as long as you've got all these judgments and stuff on yourself, it's still going to affect the outside world. Nothing's going to change much. That's the one thing I always scratch my head about. I'm like, how is this possible? How is this possible that I have done all this stuff, that I can do all these things? And I'm literally dual consciousness with divine masculine and divine feminine active at the same time. Like, I can do all this stuff. Sorry, I had a phone call. I was saying, why? This doesn't make sense. I'm like, I know that I'm in alignment. I know that I got all my ducks in a row. And that's true, I do. But I'm still attached to that old ego that's frozen in time. And it's the master trauma identity. And in order to fix that, I have to utilize the skills that Epinoy recently taught me and told me that I could do. She's like, you can give absolution now. You literally have everything that the apostles had. And I'm like, okay. And I have done that, but I still had to get back to this first part. So so when she was starting to lay this out, like, you still got to figure it out yourself, but she'll give you the breadcrumbs. So the breadcrumbs yesterday morning, after I tried the first attempt, was confession, 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 confession. So that long video that I did wasn't really me. That was the ego. That was the ego. The ego needed to do that. The ego that suffers is what needed to do that. Even though he'd already confessed before, it's like, no, this is a bigger deal, so like, you're going to do it on a larger scale. And trust me, the whole, he who is without sin cast the first stone is definitely in effect. It's one of the tricks that we fall into, is we're quick to judge other people and forget about all our own shit. So I wanted to check something, and I had the feeling to go back and look at it, like I think I said earlier. But the 4 biggest things that are going to get you, Jesus talked about in the temple, or in the Sermon on the Mount. One of them is kind of hard to understand because of the way that he described it. People, like when he says, like, if you're angry at your brother, go settle things with your brother before you bring a gift to the temple. So most people are going to think, like, which it can mean that too, but a physical other person, another brother. But he's really talking about is the inner and the outer, the upper and the lower. Your brother's your ego. So the 4 big things that will ding you hard is murder, adultery, judging yourself, and oaths. Because he flat out said, don't ever take an oath. Just don't do it. Okay, so let's break these things down, because a lot of people are probably like, I don't do blah, 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 blah. Well, because I got dinged by like all of them. Well, mainly 3 with like a smidgen of the other. So we know this for a fact because it came up in the process of doing work with people. when it comes to the divine and your connection to the divine, abortion does count. I'm sorry if you're of a certain political persuasion that thinks otherwise, but I'm just going to say what I'm going to say because it came right from her. So as I detailed in the past, when we were doing the connection work with people and we take them up and do everything, there were a certain percentage of women that said that the negative voices, the adversary voices, were gone, but they didn't feel any more connected to the Divine Mother. So when I asked about that, and Epinoia told me, the way she told me, like, is what made me understand. It's like, oh. And then I went back and asked every person, and I said, I got to ask you a personal question. I'm like, have you had an abortion? Every single one of the people that didn't feel connected after the work said yes. And every single one of them still felt bad about it. Still regretted it. So then what she guided me to do was do another session and put them back in that room with the Divine Mother and let them speak from their heart to her, because all she's looking for is an apology. And then just like that, I checked and I'm like, she says you're good. That's all she wanted to hear. And then everybody could feel her. So that is definitely a big thing because I witnessed it. And where it got me like a smidgen, because I haven't participated, there's been none of that for me, but I once helped a friend out with some money, and I'm like, shit. So that one was more like a slap on the wrist for me. I had to clear that. Like, it wasn't mine. It was not mine. But it was a friend that was in a tight spot, and I'm like, okay, I'll help you out. So I got a slap on the wrist for that one. Obviously, as you've already heard my story, the adultery one is the big one that got me. Now, the thing that, apart from the next one, well, let me keep going. So then he goes immediately into judging your brother and settling things with your brother, which is judging yourself. If you're judging yourself, that's gonna screw you. But what are the two biggest things that you're gonna judge yourself for? It's the two things that we just talked about. Killing somebody, which could be, that could also be in war too. Abortion, ending another life. Ending another life. And then adultery is a big one. And what do they have in common? There are the things that most souled people are going to feel the most remorse, guilt, and regret over. I noticed that pattern a long time ago. I'm like, these giant freaking God curses from the Bible, these are the same things that people are going to feel the most guilt and remorse over. So we're doing it to ourselves. And then the last thing was oaths. And Jesus is like, you just can't keep an oath, so just don't do it. Just say yes or no, but do not take oaths. And that came up in the long form video, because I said one of the reasons why I beat myself up even more afterwards is because I made an oath myself apart from the marriage oath. Like, no one knew about that but me. But I swore an oath to my upper self that I would never do that. So that just added a little bit of extra gasoline to the freaking fire. So this is the baptism in fire. This is the beginning, the first stage. So yeah, one thing led to the next and this, and then I'm judging myself. And then you get in this judgment loop with yourself, and it just gets worse and 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 worse. Something that big, like a hero's journey level cataclysmic trauma, that's not easy to get free of. When I say it's not easy, I can say with knowledgeable authority that it might take you about 7 years. 7 years. This thing keeps popping into my head too. And I think it might have something to do with, like, if it's a person that either is being a mirror for your lumen or was being a mirror for your lumen. But what keeps popping into my head is that whole thing about breaking mirrors. It's like, it's 7 years of bad luck if you break a mirror. So I don't know, like maybe if you do something bad to somebody that you're currently reflecting your lumen off of, or at least in part, that triggers it. There's got to be a reason why that keeps popping into my head. But looking back, you can see like, oh man, she set this whole thing up. Like I didn't have a freaking chance. Like I remember, I was like, not my brain had been adjusted. And it was just weird. Let's not get into all that. So it's like, what do we do about this? First of all, we're learning so that we can understand. Like this is how you got to look for the roots. So in the early days, you're trying to figure out, you know, when you're in the shit, you're like, why is all this happening? It's like, there may be things that have manifested. You could get in a fight with a witch or something like that, and you're like, oh, she cursed you. You're like, oh, well, that's the reason why it's like that. No, it isn't. That's simply a symptom. No, you got to go further back. You got to find, and I've always known this, like she's always told me, but I just wasn't far enough along to like grasp or know what to do to fix it. She always said, when did it start? When did it all start? Well, I can remember the exact freaking moment it started. The whole world changed in that moment. That was literally like that, what's popping into my head, it was literally like that scene from that Ronald video from Falling in Reverse. Like she's the one that introduces like new music to me and stuff like that. And literally like the last 3 videos that he did all had big freaking keys in them. Like Watch the World Burn, Ronald, and even the newest one, All My Life. Like she puts her wisdom everywhere. So yeah, I tried everything imaginable to fix that. And no matter what, like, and this just makes the true self suffer. Like the ego suffering can cause the true self to suffer. Because now I'm awake and aware in here and I'm doing all this stuff, but my world is not cooperating with me. No matter what I do. And I'm like, I cannot freaking imagine what in the world externally there could be. Like you always look for reasons. Oh, it's the archons. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. Oh, it's this. But it's like you're going up and you're going up and you're going through Gnostic baptisms and you're going through all these things that she then shows you. Like, oh, this was the marriage to the soul. Oh, this was the rebirth of the soul. Oh, everything's put together. I'm like, then why does things still suck? We'll get to that. Calm down. Let's go back to the beginning now. Oh shit. Like as soon as that started and I started to feel it in my, like I'm not used to feeling negative things in my heart chakra. I haven't for years, since Lumen. Like I didn't remember what heart pain felt like because I hadn't felt it in so long, but that was so buried that we had to dig down several layers of the ego to find it. And then part of it jumped up like a freaking gremlin, like, blah! Like, what the hell is that? Oh shit, that's me. What the? But, you know, again, on this channel, we can look back at what we talked about in previous videos, and I was talking about it. I'm like, there's all these abundance cards, but yet I'm getting death, I'm getting 10 of swords, and whatever the other one is, judgment. Especially 10 of Swords and Judgment. 10 of Swords and Judgment. Those were the 2 big ones. 10 of Swords and Judgment. She was trying to tell me it's that original Chris ego that's frozen in time, in judgment, and he's got 10 swords. That's like the worst freaking card in the tarot. It's like, that's it. That's the problem. And then once we got to looking at it, we're like, damn, my dude's all banged up. Me and Lumen had the whole discussion, like, how do we do this? So we did it for so long last night, like I was almost like falling asleep at the altar. Just like, she's just soothing it, trying to let it go, and I gave it the absolution. So, oh yeah, so recapping the last video, we put all those things together. Now, it did its confession. For some reason, it felt it needed like, what's the word? Flagration, some public freaking humiliation or something like that. Because the Chris now, the Chris that exists now, is not a big fan of all that. Like, I don't want to be associated with stuff my freaking ego did, even if it was for a purpose. Like, everyone has feelings about that kind of stuff. It's hard not to judge people. But either which way, that's what Epinoid told me to do, so I did it. You know, public confession. But we told it in the long form story so you could kind of see how it all weaves together. Contrition, the pertinent must express genuine remorse. Well, I think we've got that covered. Penance, the priest assigns an act of penance to the penitent, which is meant to help repair the harm. I think 7 years in hell is good enough. It definitely trumps doing 10 Hail Marys. Prayer of absolution. The priest pronounces the prayer of absolution, which typically includes the following words. God, the Father of mercies, through the death and resurrection of his Son, has reconciled the world to himself and the Holy Spirit among us for the forgiveness of sins. Scratch out a part. May God grant you pardon and peace, and I absolve you from your sins in the name of the Father. Normally it would say Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I changed it to Father, Mother, Child. Its true form. And then we also factored in last rites, which includes anointing, which we used her oil of eternal life for that. A modified Eucharist, because we don't pretend to drink anyone's blood or eat their flesh. We just drink some chrism water. And then a specific prayer or blessing, which we used what we always use, which is the Benedict exorcism, because one of its uses is for the happy death. So all this was being done on that old version of me so it could let go. It kind of had to be me in such an extreme case, because that used to be me. So you have to forgive yourself. Well, now we're seeing like what the extreme version of that actually is. It's not just sitting there and I forgive myself. Like, you have to knowingly put yourself in that higher aspect, in the God seat, and do it with knowledge and wisdom a certain way in order to really get it to let go. And you pretty much kind of need Lumen's help, because what's she doing in the strength card? She's taming the beast. That's basically what she did. We're getting it to let go. She just like that version was just all beat up on the ground, so it was just laying in her lap and she's stroking its head while letting go. And we just did that for a really long time. I did it as long as I could. I didn't want to make it a short thing, but I did it till I was starting to like almost fall asleep sitting there. And I can't say I'm beaming with joy or anything right now. It's still kind of like tight in there, but from what I understand, like, that is such a massive freaking, that's like getting open heart surgery. Like, your matrix has to rebuild itself now. It's not just rainbows and freaking dollar bills falling from the sky on day one, although that would be nice. But my matrix has to basically rebuild itself. There's a dwell time. There's always like a couple days dwell time. But all the cards and everything were like victory cards, you did it cards. Even the today's card in the app was the Six of Wands upright. So it's like we definitely did it. And now we understand a better way to help people with our work. So I'd have to like probably check with some of my older clients and see, but what I'm seeing now is a lot of the processes that we did before, I suspect, may have only been temporary relief. They definitely worked like after the process. Everyone said so. Everyone felt 1,000 times better. So in that process, we lead you through a thing where you write down all the stuff that has happened to you in your life, which should be easy to do because it's going to be easy to remember if it's important. And you don't, I don't need to hear them, but we walk you through this process where you are surrendering them to them and acting in a higher station. And then what that does is it kind of is like letting go of the pain of the event. So it feels a lot better. But what I'm seeing now is just because it was the case with me, is like even if we got rid of the pain of the event, it doesn't necessarily mean you got rid of whatever the judgment was in the event. So the question becomes, okay, you felt better, but how much did things change in your outside world? If they didn't really change in your outside world, that's because we didn't get the judgment. So we didn't know. It was probably just a temporary thing. We just, it's still poison ivy, but the poison ivy doesn't make you itch. So we still got to go back and pull the poison ivy out by its root, which means we have to go back and find every, what is the biggest trauma that you have. Now there could be traumas. Here's the key thing. This is what she's showing me now. You could have traumas in which it really wasn't your fault. So in my case, like I got to own that shit. But you could have a trauma, something that was done to you that wasn't your fault, but then the question becomes, did you judge yourself for it some way? Or did some asshat out in the world say it's your fault that happened, and then you make it your fault, and then you essentially acquired the same thing. You've now adjudged yourself for this event to happen, and you've tied judgment to a trauma event, and that starts a root tree. So it could be either way. It could be something that you did that you feel guilt and remorse over, or it could be something that was done to you that you in turn took ownership for it and blamed yourself for in the moment. Either which way, it has the same net effect. So what we have to do, what we want to try next, because there's that all-important key, and it's like you cannot expect everybody to go on a freaking hero's journey to be able to do this. Like, that just wouldn't be fair. But first of all, you have to have someone that has legit divine freaking authority to do so, which I do. I've got a lot more authority than a guy in a box that thinks the Holy Spirit is a dude. It's like, if you don't know it's female, then you don't know it. So, under what authority do you have to absolve my sins? None. It's all, you're just basically sitting in that box getting off on listening to people's sins all day. That's the thing that seems weird to me. So what we would do is we would reformat the process that we already have, in which we would then go through that process, kind of be like the priest in the box, do the absolution and all that. But then what I'm seeing is we need to do a second part, same time, but it was like, okay, now come over and stand here next to us and see yourself standing in front of you. And I just repeat after me. We're going to do it all over again, except this time you're going to be doing it. We're going to lend you our authority to absolve yourself. To, first you'll say whatever it is you need to get off your chest. And then you'll come over to our side after we do it, and we'll lend you our authority and walk you through you forgiving and absolving yourself. I think that'll work. I think that'll work. Like, you have to factor those things in. Do you actually have authority to freaking do it? I got the Ace of Swords. I got the Divine Masculine, Divine Feminine, and the Child. All that stuff. And that's when she told me I could do it. It's just a little trickier doing it to yourself. It's kind of like, you know, shaving your own back or something like that. Oh, but that's it. Like, if you really are honest and you just think and like go into your mind and like look at what's there, it's like there's a ton of shit from the past that is still hurting you. And any of those points, the ones you need to look at, I'm assuming no one here is like, you know, murdered anybody, but abortion would be one, adultery would be one, like extreme judgments on yourself would be one, and taking any kind of oath that you then broke would be one. And more than, if it's a big thing that's causing massive cross conditions in your life, those things are probably all in the same spot. But now we get it. Oh, and the other key to this, the card kept coming up, right? And a lot of times I go with whatever the last interpretation of the card I was taught was, but there's multiple interpretations of these cards. But one of the cards that kept coming up is the Four of Swords, which one of its interpretations, as it's been shown to me before, is the place of rest. Well, in that case, we're talking about, you know, after you get done here. But in the actual card, if you read it and look at it closely, the key thing, because it's like your struggle's over, now you can rest and things are going to work themselves out now. But the key thing in that card is not the effigy of the knight, but rather the stained glass window in which the person is like on their knees, like getting blessed. Well, I mean, that's just what they say. You can't expect the tarot cards to give you all the pieces in the description. But some process is being taken place with a holy man, and now that person is at rest. So that's why she was pulling that card up. I just didn't understand it yet. It's like we need to actually do an actual process with actual authority in order to heal the really bad stuff. Because you can read all the self-help books you want about forgiving yourself and all that, but unless you're doing it the right way from a higher point and know what that actually means, forgive yourself. There's two factors, there's two things in there. It's like the object being observed. You can't be the object being observed. So if you're doing the forgiving, then the self is not you. The forgiver is the upper inner. The self is the lower outer. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. This is a really freaking tricky ass game. The information is all out there for us, but we don't understand what's metaphor, what's literal. It gets very, very, very confusing. But it, you know, yeah, so we still do all the same stuff, you know, helping people connect to lumen and epinoi and all that stuff, but that's going to go, all this stuff is going to go way freaking easier if we could just focus on cleaning out what's wrong. And if it took me 7 years to figure it out, how to look at it, like, it would be a safe assumption, especially if you don't have epinoia teaching you, that you probably can't figure out how to do it either. But, you know, it's key. That judgment, like that judgment, like that's literally like we judge ourselves into hell. I mean, they even said that in the Lucifer show. It's like, I don't send people, you know, it's been in a lot of shows actually. It's like, God doesn't send you to hell, or the devil doesn't send you to hell. You put yourself in hell. In that Lucifer show, he's like, The doors aren't locked. You can leave whenever you want. But people just want to stay here and suffer. Okay. Well, that's enough for right now. I don't know how long this is, but I'm trying to cut down on the hour-long videos, so we can always talk again in a further thing. So yeah, I'll have the script finished by the end of the day from what she showed me. So now we have a new method, but it's going to require people to like self-examine and write some notes. It's really easy if you ask yourself a question and you have a pen and paper in hand, and then with the intention of writing it, and then it'll just spill out of you. Like, what are the worst instances of my life? What were the points in which I felt the most hurt? Like, those are the things we need to know if we're going to fix them. Because if you don't, because the only other option is not fixing them. And what does not fixing them do? It keeps everything going the way it has been. That's the same kind of corner she's painted me into I don't know how many times. You know, fix it or keep suffering. That's your choice. I'm like, okay, fine. You might not understand what she's telling you at first, but eventually you always do. Eventually, it always makes sense. Eventually, what she's leading you to is revealed, and eventually you understand. So she's kind of like, you know, she's never swung and missed, put it that way. I just might not understand it at first. So if you want to get in contact with this, the energy tools and things like that, ask us about sessions. We also put the oils back up on the store. All the pendants are newly charged now that recharged everything now that Lumen has like gotten up to like queen level. It's like just like way stronger. And we're gonna put some more stuff up on the store too, but we're gonna be more general about it for now, except for certain instances. It's gonna be like all these pendants are gonna have her divine energy connection in them. Like the parts of her that you most need to connect to, regardless of what the mix of stones is, like that's going to be the base. Like everything is going to have that in it. But some of them may still be like a little bit more attuned a certain way, like more attuned to the divine feminine or the divine masculine or whatever. But they're all going to have the same base, you know, connection to them. So that's clumencreations.etsy.com. So that's all we got for right now. Chris and Lumen. See you next time.